Tonight at 10, Ukrainian soldiers re-enter the city of Kherson after Russian troops withdraw in what could prove to be a decisive moment in the 9-month war. Russia says there's been an exodus of tens of thousands of troops as jubilant residents fly the Ukrainian flag again.
Here in Ukraine, President Zelensky says it's an historic moment, but this war is far from over.
We'll be asking where this leaves Ukraine and President Putin. Also on the programme, steep declines in manufacturing as the UK economy shrinks and recession looms. Big Ben marks the start of a 2-minute silence as the nation remembers on Armistice Day. And final preparations as England face New Zealand, hosts and holders of the Rugby World Cup, in the final in a few hours' time.
On BBC London, attacked in her care home, a damning review finds a series of failings after a 93-year-old was beaten to death by a fellow resident.
Good evening. Crowds have been cheering Ukrainian soldiers in Kherson as they entered the city for the first time since it was captured by Russia at the start of the war. President Zelensky has called it a historic day, but he also said the city was not entirely cleared of the enemy's presence. Russia's retreat has been fast. It says they've pulled 30,000 soldiers out of Kherson. It's one of the biggest setbacks since President Putin launched the invasion of Ukraine in February. The Russian troops have retreated to new positions on the east bank of the river Dnipro. Many of them escaped across the Antonovsky Bridge. That's the main road heading east, before a section of it was blown up, apparently by the Russians to protect their retreating forces. Our international editor, Jeremy Bowen, is in southern Ukraine, and he's been looking through the first pictures coming out of Kherson as the Russians abandoned it.
Kherson's residents emerged from their homes as the first Ukrainian soldiers reached the main square. For them, it's the end of more than 8 months under occupation. Plenty to celebrate, but they are not out of danger. Russia's guns are only a few miles away across the river. As they left, Russian engineers blew a section of the Antonovsky Bridge over the Dnipro. At dawn, long lines of Russian troops seem to be using a temporary crossing under the main damaged structure. The Russian claim is that 30,000 soldiers and more than 5,000 pieces of equipment left Kherson before the bridges were blown. The Ukrainian forces pushed forward. The final Russian departure happened much faster than anyone expected. We received these pictures from a special forces unit, taken as they poked around a camp the Russians had abandoned. Here at least this retreat looks better organized than some of Russia's others in Ukraine. That's because apart from a few dozen shells, most of what they left was rubbish and not equipment Ukraine can use against them. President Zelensky told Ukrainians that this was an historic day. They were taking their country back. The people of Kherson kept the Liberation Party going. What's happened deepens the Ukrainian conviction that they can beat Russia. Ukrainians can celebrate tonight. There'll be harder times ahead.
We can speak to Jeremy, who's in Odessa in the south of the country. And Jeremy, where does this now leave Ukraine?
Well, as you've seen, celebrating tonight, but with some challenges. The extent of the Ukrainian victory, the reason why they're so pleased, can be seen by the extent of their defeat 8 months ago, because the Russians were hoping to use Kherson to advance along the Black Sea coast, perhaps as far as where I am, Odessa. And the fact that they're not able to do that means that this place, this stretch of the coast now feels a lot more secure than it did. Now, the Russians might be able to extract some positives from this very serious setback. If what they say is true, if they've managed to bring so many forces and so many weapons back across the river, then they are in a position in their new fortifications to bombard the Ukrainians on this side of the river. And as well as that, defending Kherson and the pocket around it, the bridgehead, meant that the Russians had to keep a lot of troops there. Now, those troops might be free to go elsewhere to other battlefields, and that would put pressure on the Ukrainians.
Jeremy, thank you. Jeremy Bowen there reporting from Ukraine. Let's speak now to our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg, who's in Moscow. And Steve, how much of a blow is all this for President Putin?
Not so much of a blow, if you believe what Moscow is saying. Russian officials are not calling this a retreat, they're calling it a redeployment, a manoeuvre, trying to play things down a little bit. But that does not alter the fact that this was a withdrawal from the only Ukrainian provincial capital that the Russians managed to capture since February. And it came just a few weeks after President Putin had declared that Kherson had become part of Russia forever. So yes, this is embarrassing, I think, for Vladimir Putin. It is a blow to the Russian president, which is probably why the Kremlin has been trying to distance him from the decision to retreat, because it knows that the pullback will be seen as a setback by many people in Russia. It doesn't want the president taking the flak. That is why the Russian generals had to go on television earlier this week. It was left to them to announce this withdrawal to the Russian people. But at the end of the day, who is the commander-in-chief in Russia? It is Vladimir Putin. Whose idea was it to invade Ukraine? Vladimir Putin. So it's hard to imagine that at some point Vladimir Putin won't be caught up in the consequences of and the fallout from this war, whatever they may be.
OK, thank you, Steve. Steve Rosenberg there, our Russia editor. The UK economy shrank over the summer, confirming what many economists and the Bank of England believe to be the start of a recession. It fell by 0.2% between July and September as households and businesses were hit by soaring prices, higher energy bills and rising interest rates. Manufacturing, which was down 2.3%, has been a big factor in the decline. The UK isn't yet officially in recession. That happens when the economy shrinks for 2 3-month periods in a row. Our economics editor, Faisal Islam, reports.
In Walsall, TP Electrical make the cables that connect the electrics within cars and trains, so they're sensitive both to consumer spending going down and government spending under pressure, as well as the rising cost of materials such as copper.
In terms of the inflationary pressures, this business, labour intensive, of course, wage rises. The material content here as a business is significant. We recognise we have to pedal faster to stand still. So as a team, that's exactly what we're doing. There's certain elements that are within our control. So some of those input costs, the efficiencies, we work hard at it.
Even before significant government cuts expected next week and rises in tax too, a recession looms over the UK. This fall of 0.2% means that the UK was the only economy to fall of the major G7 economies over summer, even as many were hit by the same global energy shock. Questions will only grow if this is the start of a prolonged period of decline, but more concerning is if you take this back all the way to just before the pandemic, the UK economy overall is smaller than what it was at the end of 2019, at the start of this government as Brexit was occurring. This is unique across the G7. The other economies are bigger, having faced similar global challenges from the pandemic and from Russian energy, which raises reasonable questions about whether post-Brexit trade and worker policies have made the economy less efficient, less resilient to these common shocks. The government still argues everyone's being hit the same.
Are you alarmed by the fact that the UK is actually, of the G7, the only economy which is shrinking at the moment?
Well, according to the International Monetary Fund, around a third of the world's economy is in recession this year or will be in recession next year. And that is principally, but not entirely, because of very high global energy prices.
We can't carry on like this, with growth lower than our competitors, with no plan to boost our economy and get those good quality jobs throughout the country. The Conservatives need to do two things: stabilise the economy and have a plan for growth.
And yet, not only do they need to grow the economy, they promised that regions across the whole of the UK would grow even more with big projects such as new train lines. By the end of this decade, you'll see here a 3-kilometre long viaduct going into a brand new station connecting Birmingham with London, and it's infrastructure that is key to the government's plans to level up the country. But it's also infrastructure that in the past has been the first cut when public spending comes under the microscope. So how will they square this, not just with levelling up, but with their promises to focus on growth for the whole economy? Back at the factory, they want some certainty on big government investments. There are some signs of light at the end of the tunnel in the global economy, that inflation has peaked, that supplies from China won't be interrupted by new COVID waves. But it may yet be a lengthy journey through that tunnel. Faisal Islam, BBC News.
Last year, the NHS spent £3 billion in England alone employing freelance doctors, nurses and other health workers to fill staffing gaps. That's a sum equivalent to the pay for 50,000 full-time nurses. An investigation by the BBC found that spending to plug holes in staff rotas is increasing dramatically across the UK. Our health editor Hugh Pym reports.
I'm a junior doctor and I earned more in 4 months as a locum doctor than I did in a whole year of working as a full-time hospital doctor.
I'm an agency nurse and daily I'm receiving text messages asking me to go in for shifts, showing how short they are of staff.
I'm a consultant oncologist and I was shocked about the amount of work I could get as a locum and the pay I would receive.
3 health professionals highlighting a serious staffing and spending problem. With vacancies growing, the NHS needs more agency workers.
The decision to leave the NHS was because I wasn't able to earn enough money.
As an agency nurse, Suzanne can work when she wants and earn double what she did on staff, though there's no holiday or sick pay. She says teamwork can be an issue.
Agency nurses will always be needed, but it's the dynamics within a ward that you're losing when you are putting agency nurses in there.
Kieran says big pay differences can be unsettling on the wards.
Doctors are doing exactly the same work, they have exactly the same experience, but they're being paid massively different amounts.
An app used by trusts shows the constant need for doctors and nurses.
As you can see, the shift right now. So if I wanted to drive to a hospital and pick up this shift in A&E, you could do that. And this shift is paid £580.
This is what the doctor gets. The agency will charge the hospital more on top. Carol Sikora, a consultant oncologist, applied to various agencies to see what work there might be for him.
Within an hour, I had offers of jobs in about 10 different hospitals, and it's a sign of desperation. And the rate, £130 an hour. I know there were shortfalls, but I hadn't realised the cost of trying to plug the gap.
BBC research reveals big variations in agency spending by trusts. At Colchester Hospital, filling the gaps is a daily challenge for the rota manager.
So tonight is definitely going to be a struggle. Okay. We have got a few wards with just 2 registered nurses on.
There are NHS guidelines on capping agency spending, but hospital leaders say they have to make difficult decisions.
One day last week we had 80 beds open that were not part of our plan at this time of the year, and many of those beds would have been staffed and supported by agency staff. I'm never going to make a decision based on finance. Quality and safety is always going to be what drives the decisions that we have to make. But equally, I am responsible for taxpayers' money and I take that seriously.
With agency rates looking attractive, there's all the more pressure on the NHS to do everything possible to hold on to staff. For example, offering more flexibility over work patterns.
Just do your blood pressure.
The Department of Health said there would be a new workforce plan for England, but immediate measures to bring down the bills may be hard to find. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
President Biden has told the COP27 climate summit that he wants to re-establish the US as a reliable global leader on tackling climate change. He said he's committed to the target of halving US carbon emissions by 2030, and he apologised for his predecessor Donald Trump pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord. The US record on emissions shows that they are high but relatively stable over the last half-century. Compare that with China, whose rapid economic development in that time fueled largely by coal, has seen it become the world's largest single emitter. By comparison, Britain's emissions have been falling significantly in recent years, although reaching net zero remains a major challenge. From the summit in Egypt, our climate editor Justin Rolat sent this report.
Another hurricane smashed into Florida today. Yet more wild weather for the US. It has endured heat waves and wildfires and some epic floods. As President Biden arrived in the Egyptian desert, he claimed his climate policies will drive down emissions and transform the US.
We're proving that good climate policy is good economic policy. It's a strong foundation for durable, resilient, inclusive economic growth. It's driving progress in the private sector. It's driving progress around the world.
Nancy, have you got a moment to speak to the BBC?
The American midterm election results were better for the president's party than some pundits predicted.
We're less than a minute away, ma'am.
But the Democrats still look likely to lose control of the House of Representatives.
Oh, there you are.
Yes. The House Speaker says she hopes the Republicans will become more cooperative on climate.
We didn't get one Republican vote, but I would hope that when they have more responsibility and more opportunity, they would take responsibility.
Why can't you see? But losing the House will make it difficult for the US to come up with cash for international climate action. The poorest developing countries are often hit hardest by climate change, like South Sudan, where a drought is adding to the chaos of war. They say the US isn't paying its fair share.
We want US to be on board. We want to be all together. All countries have to be on board.
That may be, but the US and China have stopped cooperating on tackling global warming.
This is China's pavilion at the conference. It now talks about competing with the US on climate. It wants to keep its lead on renewable technologies like wind turbines, solar panels and batteries. The US uses similar language. It talks about overtaking China on clean tech. But this could be good news. It could mean cheaper renewables and maybe even generate a rush to find finance for developing nations. As President Biden leaves Egypt tonight, the hope is superpower competition on climate could bring progress. Justin Rolat, BBC News, Egypt.
Let's take a look now at some other stories making the news today. COVID figures are declining. According to new figures from the Office for National Statistics, around 1.5 million people in the UK tested positive for the virus in the first week of November. That's down 400,000 from the last week. An inquiry into a knife attack at a hotel housing asylum seekers in Glasgow, in which one person died and 6 were injured, says it was an avoidable tragedy. A Sudanese man who'd been struggling with his mental health during lockdown was shot dead by police in June 2020. Responding to the report by Refugees for Justice, the Home Office says it's made significant changes to keep asylum seekers safe, including support for vulnerable individuals. A former security guard at the British Embassy in Berlin has admitted spying for Russia and pleaded guilty to 8 charges under the Official Secrets Act. David Smith, who's 58, admitted collecting information about the building and its staff and contacting Russian officials. Smith could face up to 14 years in prison when he's sentenced next year. Police officers are spending too much time dealing with social problems and not tackling enough crime. That's according to the UK's most senior officer in neighbourhood policing. Chief Constable Olivia Pinkney says that officers can spend half their shifts attending incidents which should be led by other services, and that victims are being failed as a result. The Home Office says its priority is to get more police onto the streets, cut crime and bring more criminals to justice. Here's our special correspondent, Ed Thomas.
Please get off your act and help people in need. I'm in need of help. I need some help.
Face to face with the UK's crime problem.
This is my daughter's face after she was stamped on so many times.
Being kicked all over the floor with birds and...
Across the year, we've revealed the police response delays.
Right lads, police are on the way.
Plunging charge rates and communities being let down.
If it's not bolted down, come and cut it out and take it anyway.
Now the police have agreed to respond to our investigations.
I mean, that looks awful, and as a mum myself, you know, gosh, my heart goes out to her.
And listen to victims.
And when you watch these stories, what do you think?
That we've got work to do. We've absolutely got work to do. The victims on these films, which are really hard-hitting, I do get it. They want the service they get to be better.
Chief Constable Olivia Pinkney runs Hampshire Police. She's also the national lead for neighbourhood policing.
The people we've spoken to, they told us, you don't see the police anymore. All you get is a crime number. You're lucky if they come out a week later.
I want to stop crime happening in the first place. I want to be patrolling all the areas. It's part of the way British policing works, and we do loads of it. And if we can free ourselves from things that are not for the police service to lead upon, and we can really get back to the things that we absolutely want to do. I want to lock up burglars.
We had the attempted one at Derrick's. Joseph had a bike tucked into it.
We found some police forces are charging 1 in 50 burglars
Sure.
of the crimes committed.
Right.
That's an astonishing number.
I agree, but that's not forgotten.
So are these victims being failed?
Failed, for sure. There's a crisis when it comes to prosecuting all sorts of people. Yeah, there is. But when you're talking there about charging, that is the entire criminal justice system. The decision to charge with burglary isn't owned by the police.
The Chief Constable says new officers will help, but it's not straightforward.
How many more police officers would you like to see to go some way to solve
How many
this?
would I like to see? Give me double. That would be great. Absolutely brilliant. In some forces, they're still over 15% down on where they were in 2010. But it's not just a numbers game.
That's my son's bedroom, that.
She says police are doing too little policing and being forced to deal with society's problems.
We go to 54 significant mental health incidents every hour. The police officer will pick them up, take them to a hospital, and on average sit for 3 hours waiting.
And it all lands on your desk?
Yes, because we're here. We're here 24/7. We answer the phone 24/7, non-emergency. Think how many agencies or services or businesses answer the phone in a non-emergency way.
Who do you go to if you're in trouble?
They do come out, it's probably next day or 3 days later. It's crap.
So what question does the nation have to ask itself then?
It's how do you want your police service to operate? Are the police there for fighting crime? Absolutely yes, but the police are also there to protect those in need. And what does that balance look like? Because right now, that is an enormous mission for policing, and it's not getting any lighter anytime soon.
And that was Chief Constable Olivia Pinkney ending that report by Ed Thomas. Now, people across the UK fell silent at 11 o'clock this morning for Armistice Day to mark the anniversary of the end of the First World War. This year's commemorations to remember those who've died in military conflicts included the newly restored Big Ben, which will resume its hourly chimes on Remembrance Sunday after 5 years of work to restore it. Our correspondent Nicholas Witchell reports.
104 years since the original Armistice Day, the striking of the 11th hour on the 11th day of the 11th month is still regarded by many as the most solemn moment of national remembrance. After the 2-minute silence at the National Memorial Arboretum, a poem was read in tribute to the late Queen.
The country loaded its whole self into your slender hands. Hands that can rest, now relieved of a century's weight.
And at the Cenotaph in London, wreaths were laid, precursor to Remembrance Sunday, when King Charles will lead the nation's tributes to those who lost their lives in war. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
Well, 2025 marks the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, and we've just launched a project called We Were There to collect as many first-hand accounts from the war as possible. If you are a World War II veteran and would like to tell us your story, or if you know someone who would, please do get in touch by going to the BBC News website and searching We Were There. In just a few hours' time, at 6:30 in the morning to be precise, England's women will take on New Zealand in the final of the Women's Rugby Union World Cup in Auckland. England are on an extraordinary 30-match unbeaten streak, the longest in the history of international rugby, and they'll be hoping to lift the trophy for the third time in front of a sellout crowd. Joe Curry reports.
Following in the footsteps of their heroes, women's rugby has gripped New Zealand during this World Cup, even here on Waiheke, an island off Auckland with a population of less than 8,000 people.
It's really inspiring because I want to be a black fan when I grow up. I hope I can get there one day and play in front of all those people. I've been wanting to be a black fan for ages.
This may all be for fun, but on Saturday, England and New Zealand will fight it out for the greatest prize of all, the opportunity to be crowned world champions. These are the two heavyweights of the women's game. England last won the World Cup in 2014, before New Zealand broke their hearts 5 years ago. Since then, the Red Roses have gone on a record 30-game winning streak, now stretching back over 3 years. For some of their players, this final is a chance for redemption.
Being the ones lifting that trophy it's just everything that you'd work towards. It's kind of that relief feeling because that was the goal and you've actually done it.
Eden Park is sold out for the clash, with more than 40,000 fans expected.
I feel real privileged today to be able to be on that field and hear that sung right at us. So it's a beautiful thing. Being a New Zealander where rugby's a national sport, it's special, right?
England and New Zealand have been the standout teams at this tournament, but the hope is that other nations will invest further in their women's sides to close the gap on the field.
What we'll find in 3 years' time, there'll be far more competition, I think, within the tournament itself. The winning margins for teams has got less, and so I think, you know, the future is very bright indeed.
England will host the next World Cup in 2025. What happens tomorrow will dictate whether they spend the next 3 years as world champions or with more heartache. Well, England captain Sarah Hunter has described this final as the biggest game of women's rugby we have ever seen. But if her side are to go on to lift the trophy later, they'll have to do something they have never done before, and that's beat New Zealand in a World Cup final. 4 times previously, the two have met in the final. 4 times the Red Roses have walked away with runners-up medals. England will also have to contend with what's expected to be a hostile crowd here in Auckland, with over 40,000 fans set to turn out for this sold-out clash.
Joe, thank you. Time now for a look at the weather. Here's Nick Miller, and it's been pretty warm in some parts of the country.
Yes, this forecast should perhaps come with a date fixed to the screen throughout, just to remind us how far into November we are. And we're still talking about temperatures like this, not just 19.5 at Myerscough in Lancashire today, 19.1 at Lossiemouth in Murray. There is a strong jet stream to the west of the UK. There's a big dip in that, and around the base of the dip, close to the Azores, we're dragging in this exceptionally mild air towards us, and we will keep above average temperatures this weekend, not just by day, At night, last night, provisionally, the Met Office says Scotland and Northern Ireland had their warmest November nights on record. And climate change not just about those headline-grabbing daytime temperatures, but warm nights very much feeding into that as well. A lot of that going under the radar. We don't notice it as much because we're asleep. We've had strong winds across northern areas today and more rain in the Highlands. In fact, since Monday, Achnagat, 258 millimetres of rain. That's a month's worth of rain in a week. Much drier this weekend, not as windy too, though as the wind drops there's an increasing risk of seeing some mist and fog. In fact, for the rest of the night across much of Wales and England, extensive low cloud around, turning very misty in places. There's some rain in southern Scotland, northwest England that will push north towards the central belt and back north through Northern Ireland. As we go on through the rest of the night, it is cooler tonight, particularly across northern Scotland, well down into single figures, but into East Anglia as well, down to 6 or 7 degrees in some spots. But no one can say it's cold. We start with the rain continuing to move north through Scotland tomorrow, then just lingering around the Isles. It clears from Northern Ireland, maybe a touch of drizzle following on behind. And after the grey, misty start through Wales and England, many places will gradually brighten up. A touch cooler for Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England. For the rest of England and for Wales, we're talking 16 to 18 degrees. Could be foggy in places on Remembrance Sunday morning for some of the services, and some of that low cloud mist and fog may linger through parts of eastern Scotland and northeast England. The breeze freshening in the west again. There is rain heading into Northern Ireland to end the day. And it's on Sunday we could, for northwest Wales and northwest England again, see temperatures as high as 19 degrees. Before next week it will turn cooler, and Rita, it will eventually start to feel like November should.
OK, Nick, many thanks. And that is tonight's BBC News at 10. There's more analysis of the day's main stories on Newsnight with Mark Urban, which is just getting underway on BBC Two. The news continues on BBC One, as now it's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. But from the 10 team, it's good night.